I'm Estelle Bingham, and this is the Love, Purpose, Connection podcast. Here on Love, Purpose, Connection, I want to explore how to discover and really develop the secrets of a good life. I'm a holistic therapist and healer, and so over this series, I'll be sharing frank, inspiring, sometimes raw, often joyful conversations with a different guest each time, exploring just what those three words really mean, and also, crucially, how you can discover and develop them in your own life. Today, I'm talking to activist, writer, and journalist Scarlett Curtis. She's published 2 Sunday Times best-selling books, Feminists Don't Wear Pink and Other Lies, and It's Not Okay to Feel Blue and Other Lies. She's also the co-founder of activist collective The Pink Protest. Throughout her teenage years, Scarlett lived with a chronic back pain. She says that by the time she was 19, she'd shut herself off completely from everyone in her life. It was her journey to becoming a feminist and an activist that actually helped to reconnect her and give her a purpose. As you'll hear in our conversation, she's recently also discovered a very deep relationship to her spiritual psychic self, which she traces all the way back through her maternal family line, the Freud family. Yes, that family, and it is Sigmund Freud. It's this discovery of hers and her remarkable combination of vulnerability and strength, which I particularly want to share with you today. Scarlett Curtis, welcome to the Love, Purpose, Connection podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And we were just chatting before we got recording about the fact that you had to go to the dentist.
Yes.
Lockdowns put you inside, and it was that kind of suddenly going out into the world. What did that feel like?
It's really odd, isn't it? I mean, it's not only put me inside. I normally live in London and I lived in New York for 5 years. I went to university there. And for this whole year, I've moved up to Suffolk with my family and moved back in with my family. And we've been in very strict lockdown up here. And it's just very intense. I mean, I was very sick for a long time in my childhood. So I almost feel like I've done my fair share of quarantining. I barely left the house for sort of 5 years between the ages of 14 and 19. So I think I've found this extra hard in a way because I'm like, I've done this before. I've been here. I don't just manage to leave the house. But I remember then, and I think it's going to be the same now for all of us, there's a huge adjustment that comes with, going back to real life.
Yeah, there's a lot of social anxiety that can come from actually just being in the world again.
Totally. I remember when I was sick, when I was younger, all I wanted was to get better and be able to go out and walk and run and all these different things. And I dreamed about it. And then when it actually happened, it was terrifying. I had a complete breakdown. That was really when my, PTSD hit in. And I think, anything, you become used to a much smaller world. And even if you want that world to be bigger, when the world becomes bigger, it's very, very hard for us to adjust, I think.
So let's just go back for a moment, Scarlett, for people who don't know your story. You were well until you were in your teens. And then what was the illness that you had?
So I had an operation for scoliosis, which is very common. And, in 99.9% of cases, everything is completely fine. I got very unlucky and had, following the surgery, 3 years of pretty much constant chronic debilitating pain. And then when I was 17, I had another operation and all of a sudden I wasn't in pain anymore. And I think that's why it does feel really comparable to coming out of lockdown, because I'd been, unable to walk, unable to go to school, unable to do anything for 3 years. And then suddenly one day I was completely fine. When I got physically better, that was when all the mental health stuff happened. And I had about 2 more years of being unable to leave the house because of my brain instead of my body.
You feel really extraordinary, Scarlett. When I heard about you and the fact that I think your first book came out, were you 23 or 24?
Yeah, I was 23.
And your first book came out, Feminists Don't Wear Pink and Other Lies.
Yes. Yeah, I want to say it's a collection of essays. So it was very much, I curated it. So I brought it all together. But there's 50 women writing in it. So I don't think at that age I'd been able to do a full book on my own.
Can you accept that you actually did curate it? I mean, that's pretty amazing, Scarlett. So we'll just be with that for a moment, because it's quite inspiring. Then you created the next one. It's Not Okay to Feel Blue and Other Lies.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like it's a sort of result of this story that these feelings have propelled you forward. This inner life kind of propelled you forward.
It's actually, I've been thinking about it a lot before we started to chat, because I have over the last few years become much more interested in spirituality and meaning and magic, or whatever you call it. And it's something I struggle with a lot, because when I was younger and when I was sick, I think when you're a sick child, particularly, all anyone says to you is, this is going to be the making of you. Like, this is going to make you so strong, and it's going to make you be able to help people, and, you know, all those things they say. And obviously people are just trying to comfort you. But at the time, to my brain, it felt like they were saying, what you're going through now is worth it, because it's going to make you strong, and it's going to make you clever, and it's going to make you empathetic. And all I would think was like, I'd rather be stupid. Like, it's not worth it. You know, we have this way of telling people when they're going through hard times, instead of going, this is really bad, I'm sorry, we go, think of everything you're learning. And still, to me, it wasn't worth it. Like, I would, you know, snap my fingers and take it away in a minute. And so I always really rejected those kind of statements and anything spiritual anyone would try and put on my experience, because to me, I was just like, no, I'm in pain all day, every day. I'm 15. This is horrible. It's not meaningful in any way. And it's tough now, because I can definitely see now that that experience was what led to my interest in feminism, my interest in mental health, my deep need to help people and, you know, get people's stories out there. But I still almost find that a hard thing to come to terms with in my head, because I can almost like hear the 15-year-old version of myself in the back of my head going, like, you promised you would never say that it was worth it. Like, you promised you'd never, you know, find meaning from it. And I think for me, that also ties into a lot of the more spiritual stuff that I'm interested in, because again, when you're sick, a lot of people try and put spirituality onto you as a way to get better. And at the time, you know, I didn't have any connection with it, but now I do. You must work with people that are sick or in pain or going through things like that, right?
Yeah.
How do you find that balance between honoring what they're going through and then helping them through it?
The first thing is really in the witnessing the 15-year-old you. In that moment, we have to just be really present, and we have to really be present with what is in the room.
Yeah.
And to meet you in that place. And that place is a place of sadness and a feeling of betrayal, a feeling like the universe has kind of abandoned you. You're with what you're with, which is the day-to-day pain management story and grief, because you're 15 and you're not doing what other 15-year-olds are doing. And so I would meet you there, you know, to try and move someone on from where they are. That's not the honoring. The honoring is, I hear you and I see you and I feel you and I get it.
That's so true. And I'm sure you do this, but I try and do it now whenever I talk to someone who's going through a hard time, just to go, this is really horrid. Like, this is really hard. I think it's very important just to validate that feeling, because we spend so much of life going, think of the plus side, you know, at least you're not this, or like, at least you've got this. And I've found that always just made me feel guilty. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I should be grateful that, you know, and obviously I am grateful.
Yeah. Being able to see someone and let them be in the room with whatever they're in the room with, and to just hold those uncomfortable feelings and be in relationship with that. That's real companionship. That's real relationship. And then actually now, I think, as you said, you're kind of a bit witchy woo.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I mean, totally. I've become completely sort of obsessed with it and interested in it. I'm not in any official capacity, but I do find a lot of astrology and lunar energy and all of that has really helped me in the last few years. But I still almost struggle with it in myself, because I rejected it so much when I was, you know, physically sick and mentally sick, because I think often when you're in any kind of illness situation, people do try and push that on you. And I truly believe that with anything, whether it's yoga or astrology or crystals, or you have to find it yourself. Like no one can tell you to do that. You have to really discover it on your own.
And that's who you are in your spirit, it feels like, Scarlett. What star sign are you?
I'm a Gemini.
Gemini. Do you know what your rising sign is?
Yes, of course. I'm an Aries moon and a Virgo rising.
Oh, wow.
Also, I was born on a Wednesday in the middle of the day, on Midsummer's Day, in the middle of a decade. So I don't know what that means. It might mean that I'm very average because I was born in the middle of everything. But I just find it fascinating. I mean, I've been going through a pretty bad, tough time in the last few months. And the one thing that's helped me is I've been drawing people's birth charts. So I've become obsessed with asking all my friends what time they were born and then drawing their birth charts, which I find very calming.
Wow. I want to ask you about that. So those pictures on your Instagram, is that you?
Yes. When I first got sick, all I would do was craft. I called myself Teen Granny. How I actually got into writing was through a craft blog called The Teenage Granny, because I was obsessed with knitting and crochet, and I ran an online Twitter knitting group. So it was always a big part of my life, was kind of craft and making things. And then I definitely drifted away from it. But I think something about this lockdown and going back to that place, and I've been struggling a lot with anxiety and stuff. There's nothing like drawing and sort of getting out of your head for me that helps more than that.
Anything that brings you into the present, so a little bit of a doodle, it brings you out of that ruminating mind.
It's the most meditative, and I still struggle with still meditation, but I find those things are very meditative. And even, I guess, my Virgo rising, but I find cleaning like the most meditative of anything. I actually just spent an hour cleaning before we spoke on the podcast, and I've been looking forward to it all morning.
What were you cleaning, Scarlett?
I was just cleaning my house, but it just makes me feel very calm. And I just think with anything, like I love, I love astrology. I love crystals. I have a different crystal on me at all times. I assign all my crystals different things that they do for me. Actually, the way I got into crystals was for my whole teenage years while I was unwell. I had a deep obsession with Sylvanian families, specifically the Sylvanian babies.
I love Sylvanian families.
Yeah, obsessed. And I collect them, and I have 50 different Sylvanians, and each one means something different. This makes me sound truly crazy. So please, if you're listening to this, I acknowledge how I sound. But I had a little cat that was for confidence, and a rabbit that was for comfort. And I had a fox that I took to my doctor's appointments when I was particularly scared. And, a mole that I took to every operation I went to. And, I was 15 and I was in these horrid situations, medical situations. And if I had one of these Sylvanians on me, I would tell myself it's going to be fine. And I realized when I was sort of 20 that that's exactly what crystals are. Having something on you that you can assign a meaning. So I'm obsessed with crystals, and I have moon ceremonies every new moon and full moon, either for myself or I pull my family into doing it. And it's funny because it's not something I really talk about that much, because I think, you must find this, people have a lot of assumptions about all of this. But I've done a lot of therapy in my life and a lot of psychiatry, and been in a lot of hospitals and all of that. And I found this almost helps me as much as anything else. I think it's just a really wonderful way to think about your life, think about the people in your life, and set intentions and just think differently.
Well, I do a full moon and new moon meditation. It's actually just the idea of ritual and what it means to come together, because in that time that you bring your family together twice a month, there's something quite sacred. It's about the sort of honoring of the sacred. So the invitation is, you don't have to believe in anything, but maybe just believe in this connection that we're having in this moment, this idea of real community and a sacredness. We come together, we sit in a circle, you may make intentions. You're hearing each other in a really different way. The family's interacting in a different way. And then we create these little pockets of sacred energy, which is what we've done for millennia, thousands of years.
I think it's also powerful. And I've got 4 teenage brothers. And I make all of them do it. And then I make my dad do it and all of his sort of 60-year-old friends. And they all come in looking furious and like completely angry. And especially when I had pink hair, I think they were like, who on earth is this pink-haired idiot that is making us, howl at the moon? And then what I always say is, I hate New Year's resolutions. I think setting yourself goals for the whole year is so stressful. You have no idea what's going to happen in your year, out of your control. But setting intentions for 2 weeks is so manageable. Like, I love that ritual of thinking about my life in these 2-week intervals and thinking about, exactly what sign the moon's under, what the vibe of the world might be, even just having that to think about. And then we also always do something where we write down something we want to let go in the new moon, and then we burn it in a fire. And I've seen these teenage boys, which is my brother, he really loves it. He gets really into it, and I've gotten some big emotional things out of him through them. And I think there must be something about, because I'm born on the summer solstice, I think that's made me like a bit more interested in all of this. Me and my mum a few years ago went to Stonehenge at 3 a.m. on Midsummer's Day, and that was like one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. It was so beautiful. I just love it. It brings me a lot of joy. I tell my brothers it's like my version of football. I'm like, you believe in Tottenham and you have no reason to because they keep losing. And I believe in the moon.
So, Scarlett, I like the fact that just then you owned your birth date. Earlier on in the conversation, you were a little bit like, well, I don't know really what this means. But then then you were like, well, actually, I was born on Midsummer's Eve, 21st of June. And it does feel like an important date. It does feel like I've got a connection with it. And I think it's really important to own these things. I mean, do you feel like you sidestep this idea of like you're special, or do you feel like you sidestep that a little bit? Is that some of the stuff that goes on inside?
I think I definitely do. And I think I have a lot of issues with sort of insecurity and all of it. And I think, I don't know, maybe it came from like when I was younger being different because I was ill and all of this stuff, and just craving to be like normal and fit in and be in the park drinking vodka and a bottle of beer was all I wanted. But I also think there's always been a really intense, I've never talked about any of this, so this is great, but there's always been a very intense sort of psychic thing in the women in my family particularly. And I think I've always felt that and sort of in a way pushed it away and sometimes tried to like not acknowledge it as much. And it's hard to talk about as well, because you never want to be like, I think everyone thinks that they're special and magic in some way.
But it's also about just allowing yourself to be who you are. You're also the 25-year-old, moon circle leader of bringing people into relationship with the sacred. And that's where you are in your family. So there's a moment where we have to step into that. If you've got a psychic energy in the female line, you've got a psychic energy in the female line, and that's your intuition.
And it's funny, my mum has it too, and she told me that she cut it off. She was like, it was too intense and I cut it off. And so I've always been really determined not to cut it off, because I think there's something amazing in it. And what's really interesting is I've got 3 biological brothers, and 2 of them have none of this. Like, they are completely different energies from me and my littlest brother. And my 2 middle brothers have very similar energy, and it's very grounded and, earth sign and all of that. And then me and my youngest brother have this much more kind of frazzled and odd energy, but also that comes with this psychic thing. And it's really interesting because I think because I'm interested in crystals and the moon, sometimes you can think you're tricking yourself. And then when I see my 16-year-old brother, who has no interest in spirituality or magic or does not believe in psychicness at all, but he has these huge moments where he'll know something's going to happen before it happens, or answer a question when you ask him it, before you've told him the answer, like all of these things. And I find that fascinating, seeing it come out in a teenage boy who is not trying to bring it out at all,
Well, it's amazing. And it is about owning who you are in the lifetime. and letting those things in.
When do you think you first started to own those parts of yourself?
Well, again, because I grew up with my mum who is psychic, but I really was not up for it. So I was just like, this is not happening, because I just thought the last thing I want to do, and bearing in mind, I'm a lot older than you, and people are like, okay, you're psychic. So you have to either be figuring them out or telling them something about what's going to happen or defending yourself or explaining yourself. And I'm just not interested in that.
Totally. Or like doing it on command. I've had a lot of psychic moments, but they're never like when I want them to be or expect them to be or anything like that. The joke my friends always have about me at parties is we'll be at a party and they'll end the night, making jokes with someone at the bar. And without fail, I will be in the corner of the room and someone will be telling me about their relationship with their father and, their deep-rooted insecurity. And I truly don't bring it. Sometimes I do just want to like dance. And yeah, it's really, I think that's why I find it hard, because I don't think I'm very good at turning it off yet. And I think that's what I've been trying to learn over the last few years, is how to set boundaries with it, how to give that empathy to the people that I love and not to strangers and, people that maybe abuse it. Like I've had a lot of people in my life as well who have sort of in a way used me for those deep chats and that empathy. And I always say you end up being the friend that people call when they're having a breakdown, but never the friend that people invite to a party. And I'm like, sometimes I just want to be the friend that like gets invited to the party instead of, the one that you come and lie on my sofa crying. So I have really tried to figure out and also build friendships that aren't just based on that sort of trauma bonding, even if the person doesn't mean it to be.
Absolutely. And that's when it's unprocessed empathy. Okay. And I call it toxic empathy, which is quite radical. And toxic empathy is something that happens when we're natural empaths, but when you go out into the world and you have no boundaries, exactly what you said happens. Okay. You can get sucked dry. So that's what's happening. But also we're defined by it. We're in a bit of a codependency around it. Okay. So where I end and you begin is really, really important.
Something else I think that I used to do with that empathy, which is people always say like very beautiful people can use their beauty to their advantage, and manipulate people. And I think quite early on, I realized that people liked me because I was empathetic and because I was good at going deep. And I think I started to almost use that to get people to like me. Like I knew that if I went on a date or if I met a new friend, a way that I could make them like me was through going deep and revealing my own stuff and getting them to tell me things and responding really well to people. And I've really had to like stop myself doing it because it's just manipulative in a way. Like I don't want people to like me for that. And I also think there were some tendencies where someone would really like me for all of that, and I would feel like it was fake because I was like, but that's not really me. That's like the mirror I'm able to hold up to you, and that's those things that I can do, but it's not, you don't really know me and you don't really love me, you love my empathetic powers or whatever it is. So that's another reason I've really tried to not do those kind of things as much.
That empathy is precious. Where you go with that is a very precious thing. And you're asking to be met now properly in all of these parts of you. Because like we talked about the solstice, and for you to step into that and say, actually, well, I was born on the solstice and I think that means something. And I've got this psychic energy that I know is in me from my female line. That's deeper, actually. That's more of your intimacy. That's you revealing more to me than if we sat here in a way talking about the trauma, because the trauma is somewhere that you're well versed in that. So these other parts of you, Scarlett, this is you now. And it's also who you're becoming.
It's funny, I feel much more uncomfortable talking to you about these things than I do talking about the time I tried to take my own life or, my deepest, darkest traumas or operations, because I'm used to talking about those things now. It's funny, I've been on this kind of spiritual path for 5-6 years and I rarely talk about it with anyone. I don't know what it is. I'm very good at talking about a lot of things and I find this hard to talk about which is why I'm so happy to be doing this. And it's why I love hearing you talk about it, because you put it so well. But it's one of the only things in my life that exists outside of like words and clever thoughts, because everything else I turn into, some kind of thought.
And also you were talking about mum and the idea of mum's part of the Freud story. How does that show up for you when people mention that, or how is that sat in your world?
It's very interesting. We have a thing in my family where we do not talk about Freud. No one in my family has read Freud. None of us my grandpa used to ban my mum from ever, and all of his kids from ever mentioning Sigmund Freud. It was a complete no-no. So I grew up knowing much less about him, I think, than most people even do. And then when I went to university in America, and I'm very obsessed with Virginia Woolf, and she had lots of thoughts on Freud. And also in American university, they talk about Freud constantly. It seems to come up in every class. So I did start to learn a bit more, but what I'm very interested in is the way that I describe it. And I don't need to say this to you, but which is going on a podcast, so I'm obviously fine it being out there. But I think within my mum's side of the family and within the Freud family, there is a really strong light energy and a really strong dark energy. And I think if you look at every member of my mum's family going all the way back, you see them wrestle these two forces. And everyone has that to some extent, but I think there's something about this family where it's extremely, extremely intense. And, Sigmund Freud, for example, obviously did amazing things, but he also did terrible things and had some terrible beliefs. And I just see a lot of members of our family having to wrestle with this good and evil, magic, whatever it is. And so I think that's something I'm still trying to come to terms with in some way. But I do think a lot of it is psychic-y. And also, if you look at a lot of what Sigmund Freud wrote, a lot of it was just him being very good at reading people and empathetic, in the way that we're talking about it now. It was just, no one was really doing that then.
Wow. So this is fascinating, Scarlett. Did you do psychology in the States? What did you major in?
No, I didn't. I did, I sort of studied the history of social movements through a literature lens. So a lot of like the narratives of social movements and activism. I minored in coding, like computer coding. And even in my coding classes, somehow Sigmund Freud would be brought up. I think Americans are just obsessed. I was just incredibly grateful that I didn't have that surname on the class register, because I think I'd have gotten lots of funny looks.
So the family actually didn't talk about, you weren't allowed to talk, it was sort of vetoed, the name.
I've come to a sort of spiritual belief, which is completely made up in my own, but I think it's something to do with the fear that we all feel about the sort of thing that we've all got in us, whether you call it psychic or good or evil or whatever it is. I think we're all a bit scared of it. But what they would say is that I think a lot of members of my family, and especially the generation that were Sigmund's grandkids, just didn't want to be defined by him as well. They wanted to make their own careers and all of that, which is also interesting, I guess.
But I also love this idea of what we carry intergenerationally. So your soul has kind of chosen to drop into this deep ancestral line. But I just think it's quite wonderful that here you are and you're in a really different place with it. You're 25 and you can see those things. It's the shadow and the light. We all grapple.
Totally. I mean, I've always said, I think everyone in our family has powers and they can decide to use them. That's how I have come to see it, But I think we've all got to come to our own understanding of our past and our family and what it all means.
I want to go on. What I do want to talk about is Feminists Don't Wear Pink and Other Lies. I mean, I love that title. What inspired you to create that, and what inspired that title?
There's actually a very good reason I called it that. looking back now, I basically left school when I was 14, as I said, and from then on was kind of self-educated, a lot of which included just watching Grey's Anatomy. But I did end up getting very obsessed with certain people and certain books, and my family had never really talked to me about feminism. It just wasn't something my mum was kind of interested in, and I think she was part of particularly that generation where they were told they didn't need feminism anymore and go on with your life. And I started to realize that a lot of what I was experiencing within the medical profession was related to my gender and my age, and the way that I was seeing the way that people treated my mum compared to my dad, and a lot of what I went through in that time, that was all to do with the patriarchy and sexism, and there's a lot of that within the medical field as well. And so I started to read these books about feminism to sort of make sense of my own life, which I think is how a lot of people come to feminism. And it was like suddenly putting on glasses and being able to see clearly. It was just the most amazing experience. I'd been blaming myself for all these things that people were doing to me, and suddenly I was reading stories of women that had been through similar things, or things that weren't remotely similar but felt similar.
Like what, Scarlett? What were the kind of things that you could really relate to?
One of the areas of feminism I'm particularly interested in is internalized oppression, and the way that we, women are told it, but especially women of color, minorities, anyone that exists in this world outside of the white male cis norm. I think we are often told that the reason that things are happening to us, or that we're not succeeding, or whatever it is because of our own fault. And it's like, it's the best trick that the patriarchy ever played, was convincing people that it was their own fault, and so when I started to read, even someone like Audre Lorde changed my whole world, and Bell Hooks, and just these amazing people that were literally reframing the world that we live in. And it was incredibly powerful, suddenly realizing I could look at everything differently, and that there was actually this huge army of women out there that were looking at the world differently, and I could join them instead of feeling so alone. And then I started to learn more and think more, and realize how incredible it can be to fight for feminism and join that. I always say, like, activism for me was entirely selfish, and it was my version of self-help, because helping other people, or fighting for things, made me feel connected to the world in a way I hadn't done remotely before. But particularly Feminists Don't Wear Pink, that's a very long way of answering this, but I started to do a lot of activism. I helped organize a campaign called Free Periods, which was all around period poverty, and started to do a lot of different little campaigns and supporting other activists. And I was obviously talking about it on Instagram, and I had bright pink hair at the time, and I only wore pink clothes. And my dad went to dinner with one of his friends, and the friend was like, I'm really impressed by all the political things that Scarlett's doing, but if she ever wants to be taken seriously, she needs to stop with all the pink stuff. No feminists, wear pink in that way, and it's silly and it degrades what she's saying. And so that was like, right.
That was a ding moment.
That was the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's inspired. So actually, you've mentioned that it gave you a purpose, and it sounds like that purpose, there's this sort of connection.
There's something very spiritual about feminism as well. There's something, I think, quite magic about it, about connecting with other women, no matter what the other elements of your life are.
I love that. Okay, so when I say the words love, purpose, connection to you, what happens?
I don't know. I think, to me, love and connection are very linked. I love that you put the word purpose in there, because I think sometimes we can see the idea of purpose as being very separate from love and connection and empathy, or whatever it is. Everyone's purpose is linked to who they connect with. And purpose is such an interesting word as well, isn't it? It's like, what is our purpose?
You kind of grapple with that for your generation.
I think I do, but I also think I'm starting to take the pressure off that a bit. I think, especially, like, I've been very knocked down the last few months by my own mental health and anxiety and lockdown and whatever we're all going through. And I think some days purpose is literally just waking up in the morning and having a shower if and that's fine. I do a thing where I set myself to-do lists when I'm sad, and the other day my to-do list was literally wake up, eat something, have a shower, go back to sleep. Like, that was it. And if that was my purpose for that day, and that was all that I was able to do that day, and that was fine.
The wisdom is really giving permission for purpose to be whatever it is that day. That's where we're really kind to self.
And that's all I try and do, because there are so many days when I can't do things because of my brain or whatever it is. And I still, no matter like how much I've written about this, I still get so angry at myself for that. And I think it's my fault, and I think I'm lazy and all of this. And it's about acknowledging that some days your purpose is just staying alive. Like, that's enough, And I think I've come to that. I think probably if we'd done this podcast a few years ago, I'd have been like, my purpose is, to save the world or whatever it is. But I think your purpose is literally just to get through the day sometimes.
Absolutely. So you got my email about something that's moved you, a poem or a piece of writing.
Yes, I did. And I am a complete Virginia Woolf obsessive. I've read everything she's ever written. So I did find one of my favourite passages, which is from a book she wrote called Three Guineas, which it's my favourite of her books, but it's sort of one of her least known. And it's very odd. It's an essay about war and why we shouldn't go to war. And she presents all these different cases against war. And in the end, it becomes much more about purpose and womanhood and gender. And it's a really beautiful, short essay book. But this passage has a very famous line at the end, but it's one of my favourite passages. It's sort of her final argument for why women should be inherently anti-war. When all these comparisons have been faithfully made by the use of reason, the outsider will find herself in possession of very good reasons for her indifference. She will find that she has no good reason to ask her brother to fight on her behalf to protect our country. Our country, she will say, throughout the greater part of its history, has treated me as a slave. It has denied me education or share in its possessions. Our country still ceases to be mine if I marry a foreigner. Our country denies me the means of protecting myself, forces me to pay others a very large sum annually to protect me. Therefore, if you insist upon fighting to protect me or our country, let it be understood soberly and rationally between us that you are fighting to gratify a sex instinct which I cannot share, to procure benefits which I have not shared and probably will not share, but not to gratify my instincts or to protect either myself or my country. For the outsider will say, in fact, as a woman, I have no country. As a woman, I want no country. As a woman, my country is the whole world.
My country is the whole world.
We need to all be connected together, not in our own little weird bubbles.
Scarlett, it's been so wonderful to speak to you today.
It's been amazing. I could talk to you forever.
Thank you so much for being on Love Purpose Connection.
Thank you for having me.
To find out more about Scarlett, she's at Scar Curtis on Instagram. You can find me at Estelle.Bingham. And if you've enjoyed the show, do share it, do rate it, and do review it. This podcast is produced by Sarah Cudden with exec production from Kate Taylor. It's a Feast Collective production. Until the next one, wishing you all more love, purpose, and connection.